Good afternoon. My name's Shong Nos, and I'm a specialist in public acquisitions working in Washington. I'm going to switch to English, and I would rather avoid errors in my speech, so I'm going to shift to English. Esta tarde es elemento de transformación y tenemos hasta las 5, tenemos como una hora para conversar. Introduje el tema, voy a introducir el tema primero y luego cada uno de los presentadores. Con la velocidad de cambio en las tecnologías y las tecnologías disruptivas, las personas enfrentan retos para aplicar estas nuevas tecnologías para mejorar el cumplimiento de servicios públicos existentes y crear nuevos servicios públicos. Esta estructura de tecnología incluye Big Data, análisis de datos, tecnología de cloud, blockchain, el Internet de las cosas, inteligencia artificial y aprendizaje por máquina. Los gobiernos alrededor del mundo y aquí Latinoamérica y el Caribe están en las etapas iniciales de utilizar estas tecnologías y pensar cómo pueden afectar el cumplimiento de la administración pública y la prestación de servicios públicos. Esta sesión va a examinar estas nuevas tecnologías desde una perspectiva técnica y aprenderemos de cómo los gobiernos aquí en Latinoamérica ven los casos específicos de Argentina y México, están tomando ventaja de la administración pública para el beneficio de las personas y los negocios y así también contribuir con las economías digitales en sus países. Viendo específicamente Big Data, la producción de datos ha crecido exponencialmente en la última década y la tasa de aumento anual es de 4.300%. Los expertos estiman que el próximo año 2020, 37 zettabytes, que son 3.000 trillones de datos se van a producir globalmente. Los retos que enfrenta el gobierno incluyen no solo el volumen de datos que se produce y la calidad de los sets de datos, sino también cómo los gobiernos pueden utilizar las capacidades de datos para recopilar retroalimentación de los ciudadanos, para poner los datos en acción, para hacer que los gobiernos respondan mejor, dar servicios más proactivos y también cómo puede construir confianza pública. Los gobiernos también tienen la responsabilidad de garantizar que el marco regulatorio se mantenga al día con mayor uso de Big Data, incluyendo el desarrollo de mecanismos claros en uso y propiedad de datos y libertades civiles. A medida que el sector privado cree datos confiables, los datos serán esenciales para garantizar que los datos privados puedan accederse y utilizarse para un bien público. Dentro del área de Big Data, ha sido un movimiento acerca de datos abiertos y la relevancia de la discusión de hoy de datos abiertos del gobierno. Los datos abiertos se definen como datos digitales que se ponen a disposición con características legales y técnicas para que sea utilizado ampliamente y reutilizado y redistribuido por cualquier persona en cualquier lado, en cualquier momento. Su aplicación tiene el potencial de promover innovación, eficiencia, crear trabajos y ganancias y generar crecimiento económico. Un estudio hecho por McKinsey estimó recientemente que Big Data tiene el potencial de liberar entre 3 y 5 trillones de dólares anualmente en valor económico al aplicarse en 7 sectores: educación, transporte, productos de consumo, electricidad, petróleo, salud y finanzas. Y un estudio realizado por la Unión Europea estimó que el beneficio económico derivado de Big Data era 200.000 millones de euros anualmente. Un subgrupo importante de datos abiertos de gobierno que incluyen datos que tienen a nivel nacional, regional, local y de la ciudad y otros cuerpos públicos. Típicamente incluye datos sobre legislación, mapas, registros de compañías, propiedad, censo, presupuesto y gasto de gobierno, contratos financiados por licitación, salud, salud pública, educación, estadísticas y elecciones. El Banco Mundial ha definido una serie de beneficios que se deriven de la aplicación de datos abiertos de gobierno, que incluye la promoción de crecimiento económico, creación de trabajos, mejorar la calidad, eficiencia, efectividad y cobertura de servicios públicos y aumento de la transparencia de gobierno, capacidad de respuesta, rendición de cuentas y participación ciudadana. Los ejemplos de cómo los gobiernos toman ventaja del Big Data para la entrega de prestación de servicios públicos. Por ejemplo, el gobierno de Singapur ha utilizado los datos de transporte para entender los patrones de transporte y diseñar líneas express que reducen el tiempo de viaje y congestión de tráfico. El gobierno de Indonesia evita incendios forestales con crowdsourcing, con alta resolución y análisis de datos en tiempo real. La Unión Europea comisionó un estudio utilizando Big Data en compras públicas para detectar corrupción y colusión. El estudio hace referencia a cruzado de muchos datos disponibles a nivel público en 3 temas: registro y propiedad de compañías privadas, el registro de contribuciones financieras hechas a partidos políticos y la base de datos de licitantes o oferentes en contratos públicos. Al referenciar estos 3 grupos de datos, el estudio demuestra un vínculo entre las compañías que reciben contratos públicos y los propietarios que hacen contribuciones a un partido político en el gobierno. Esta tarde tenemos la fortuna de tener 3 altamente calificados presentadores que nos van a ayudar a entender la naturaleza de estas tecnologías transformadoras desde 3 perspectivas diferentes. Primero que todo, la perspectiva técnica, luego cómo las tecnologías digitales pueden prestar servicios públicos, el caso de Argentina. En tercer lugar, cómo estas nuevas tecnologías pueden mejorar el funcionamiento del Estado, en el caso de México. El presentador es Brian Barnier, es el director y jefe de análisis en Value Bridge Advisors en los Estados Unidos y también enseñan análisis de datos a nivel de posgrado en la Universidad de Nueva York. El señor Barnier ha liderado iniciativas en Ameritech, que ahora es AT&T, Lucent Technologies y IBM. Lideró equipos que lideraron 9 patentes en Estados Unidos en más de 20,000 millones de dólares de ventas al año. Y también lideró el primer compañía que diseñó FinTech, que produce tecnología y presta servicios financieros, y lideró la práctica de cumplimiento global con experiencia práctica en tecnología, gestión de productos y economía. Tiene perspectivas prácticas en el futuro del trabajo y diseño de negocios. Escribió un libro, El riesgo operativo, y ha escrito más de 100 artículos en aplicar estrategia, tecnología y estadísticas en temas tan variados como ciberseguridad y economía. Fabiana Ayala es la directora nacional de servicios digitales en el Ministerio de Modernización en la Secretaría de Gobierno Digital en la Presidencia de Argentina y es responsable de llevar a cabo la estrategia digital del gobierno que se enfoca en el ciudadano. Lidera un equipo de 100 personas responsables del diseño, desarrollo, implementación y mantenimiento de productos digitales y servicios. Fue miembro del equipo de proyecto que desarrolló e implementó el sistema de administración financiera en Argentina y la coordinadora de la Secretaría de Innovación y Gobierno Digital. Previamente fue la directora de Tecnología de Información e Innovación en la Agencia de Acceso a la Administración Pública. Tiene 20 años de experiencia en el sector público y 10 años en compañías privadas, multinacionales y pequeñas empresas. El tercer presentador es David Rogelio Colmenares Páramo. Fue elegido como el auditor general de Auditoría Superior de la Federación de México el 15 de marzo del 2018 por el periodo 2018-2026. El señor Colmenares Páramo ha sido presidente de la Asociación Nacional de Economistas de México y actualmente es miembro de la Junta Directiva de la Asociación Nacional de Economistas y de la Administración Pública bajo el Comité Técnico de municipalidades de México. También es el autor de muchas publicaciones, incluyendo Capital y Esfuerzo Fiscal, la experiencia mexicana, participación ciudadana y control ciudadano, federalismo fiscal en México y factores sociales y económicos de la corrupción. Aunque hay un cuarto presentador en la agenda, Alexander Borges de Oliveira, no puede estar con nosotros desafortunadamente. Su presentación se actualizará al sitio web de la conferencia pronto y trabaja en análisis de datos, en adquisiciones públicas y será de gran interés para los participantes. Ahora quisiera invitar a nuestro primer presentador, Brian Bernier, para hablar con nosotros.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we're going to do something sort of simple here to kick things off. Just going to talk about some terms and try to give you some takeaway value. Ideas that you can use when you go back to your office and people are asking you about these words like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and whatever. So get your pencils out and be prepared to take some questions back. So the first question I have for you is, have you made a decision lately? What restaurant to go to, what airplane seat to book? And when you've done that, did you have to negotiate with somebody else, say like your spouse, to pick the right restaurant? Now, how did you make that decision? What information did you take into account? Did you explore something first, or did you have a decision and then you worked backwards down to what mattered to it? Well, that's this thing called decision science. And decision science is this huge space that's been developing since about World War II. And that actually goes back to another science that started 2,400 years ago called epistemology. People like Socrates worked on that. They've been thinking about how to make better decisions and how to explore data. So today when we talk about big data and analytics, we're doing just a little tiny piece of that, adding some powerful technology, as Sean mentioned. But we're going back to something very important. And when you take into consideration what goes into the decision, you think about things that you can quantify and things that are softer, right? Like, will my spouse be upset with me if we go out to Chinese food rather than seafood, right? So we have to think about this through. So now for you, as a manager, as a finance person, talking to an IT person, when somebody comes to you with a big data analytics project, what are you going to think in your mind? What should be the first question that comes out? You want to ask, what question are we trying to answer? Right? And then you want to ask, what is relevant to answering that question? And then you want to ask them, do we understand the context in which things are moving? Does the menu change at the restaurant? Does the weather change? Do flights change? Equipment? Yes. And so we're very vulnerable to making decisions based on assuming that past things take place and that nothing has changed. So ask those three questions when people come to you and say, hey boss, we need to do a data analytics project. Stop, wait, and think through this whole 2,000-old-year literature and history of making better decisions. So that's our first point that frames everything. So then we can go and ask another question. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, we need to do artificial intelligence. You can say, what's that? And you don't need to sound silly, because most people that say artificial intelligence really aren't using artificial intelligence. It's just a buzzword. In English, we say we play buzzword bingo. Right? How many buzzwords can you stick in a single sentence? We've got IoTs with ML and AI and XYZ, and we want to do our CDAs on our X-form transfer. Right? What does that mean, right? But no, those are all buzzwords. So you want to ask them what it is, and in reality, I suspect in government, nobody is using real artificial intelligence in this room. You're all using something called machine learning, that's sometimes referred to as narrow artificial intelligence. And there's two flavors of that. The first flavor of that is supervised. The second flavor of that is unsupervised machine learning. And so here what happens is that in supervised machine learning, it's not really intelligent. In fact, it's really pretty stupid, because you have to train it. You have to tell it, this is an internet kitten, or a dog, or a cat, or whatever it is. Now, some of these can be terrific. Like, for example, certain diabetic diseases of the eye present in a very uniform way, which means that machine learning supervised is very good to diagnose these because it goes to a very low level of pixel granularity, sub-pixel granularity, that a human doctor can't read on an X-ray or an image. So it's very good for that. But in other things, supervised machine learning, very, very stupid. So now when somebody comes to you and says, hey, we're going to use supervised machine learning with the following algorithms, you're going to say, wait, how smart is this really? And go back to the previous set of questions, will this answer our question? Because in most things, it doesn't do that very well. All right. Now, there's another flavor of machine learning. That's called unsupervised machine learning. And there's a bunch of algorithms that go along with that, too. We're going to skip over all that. How many of you have a one-year-old child, a grandchild, or remember when you had one? And you remember they played a sorting game, like this one is with butterflies, some are with baby dolls. And they sort them by color, they sort them by shape, by size, whatever. They're doing grouping. That's what unsupervised machine learning does. It uses some math to group things together. But guess what? It's not as smart as a one-year-old, because it can't make a value decision that says red is better than blue, that is better than green, and that big is better than small. So unsupervised machine learning is stupider than a one-year-old. And when somebody comes to you with this, think about the grouping problem. Think about organizing your desks in piles of papers. You're making value decisions. That's why we say that it's very bad to use machine learning to select employees unless they're for a job that's almost robotic. That's why, by definition, they are structurally blind or cognitively biased. And in an earlier year, Sean's a procurement specialist, and he knows that they were used for bid rigging, right? So they're actually used to commit fraud. So you need to know the opposite side when somebody comes to you with machine learning. Now we look at cloud. Does anybody know where the term cloud came from? All right? A cloud came from way back years ago when you were drawing out a computer system and they gave you a stencil to make shapes like, data storage, round tapes and things like this. One of them was a cloud, and it stood for a telephone network. And then it stood for a timeshare mainframe system. And we're still using the term. So when somebody comes to you and asks cloud, there's really only two questions you have to ask, and that's how well is it virtualized and how well is it managed? How well is it managed and what options does it give us? Because that's all we've done in cloud computing in the last 50 years. All right, blockchain, a bunch of things in blockchain, but blockchain also breaks down in some very, very old things. The first I've got here is lily pads, and lily pads represent databases that are all around, right? Just think PCs, for example, right? So it goes way back and even older machines. The second thing is we have a way to broadcast that information by line or by wire to tell everybody what they're doing. And then we've got security, that's the case. But then we've got this sort of blockchain thing, and what it does is it uses an old computer command called append, A-P-P-E-N-D in English, and it just means attach one thing to another, like stapling some receipts together. And what blockchain does is it takes one receipt, staples it to another receipt, puts a cryptographic, which is the padlock on there, to tie them together so they can't be broken. And that's represented by the little guy at the finishing line, because he's coming through and saying, when you've got those stapled together, then you've got a guarantee of authenticity. So it's some very, very old technologies wrapped together in a slightly different way. Internet of Things. How many have heard of self-driving cars? All right, seen an Uber out there, and you heard about the accidents and all these things. What was the very first smart car ever? Walt Disney, Herbie, Love Bug. That's the image at the bottom. Now, why was Herbie the smart car? Not because he was put in a movie, but because the 1968 Volkswagen was the very first computer car with a computer microchip in it, manufactured by Bosch. Smart cars, not new. 1968. Some of you were probably born after 1968, I'm guessing, so these things have been around your entire life. Honeywell system, they were connected by wires. And then we have walkie-talkies. What do all these have in common? Today, they're tied together with Internet protocol. That's what makes the Internet using Internet IP protocol, not old wires and not other types of protocols. That's all there is behind Internet of Things, and then we've got a lot more of them than we used to. All right? And then we've got to be cautious about controls. Anybody here from Colombia? All right? So this is the 1995 airplane crash. And the reason that they crash is because of failure in control systems. In control theory, controls fail by definition. so that every time somebody comes to you, whether you're a distinguished auditor general or you're doing a computer system and say, we want to use a control, you have to say, no, controls fail by definition when they hit boundary conditions. And that's what you need to be aware of, and people die. And the last picture, anybody know what this little guy is? He's a tardigrade, a tardigrade. I'm told that's Latin. They like to name animals in Latin. And he's there because, first of all, he's microscopic. And we can see him because we can peer into the world. And a lot of what's happening in this data analytics is that we're peering into the world. But here's the last question to take away. When somebody says, hey, boss, let's do data analytics, you want to ask, are we peering into the world in a way that will allow us to see something significant? And then you want to say, do we have the curiosity to notice what we see? And when they're drilling down, will your microscope stop before it gets to the tardigrade, before it gets to the feature of interest that will explain what's going on? And so you must be curious if you're going to work in this world of decision science and this little piece of it called data analytics. So those are the terms, those are the questions, and hopefully you can all go away and be a little bit smarter when you go back into your office and somebody throws buzzwords at you. Now you've got a question. Thank you.
This is a little bit more sophisticated than we all implement. And now I'd like to share something that in the government of Argentina we're implementing as an experience, and it's a chatbot, but assisted by a robot. So this is just, we give you an introduction and to contribute some examples in line with what Brian was explaining. Now, let's move to the experience from the Ministry of Modernization, what we do and what was the approach of this government. we had a government focused to the state organizations, not focused to people. And the truth is, people adapted themselves to the paperwork they had to do that were very time consuming. And the core was the organization that allowed me to do this paperwork. So the first thing we did, put the person at the center. The center of everything was the person that had to interact with different institutions in government. So to this end, the Modernization Secretariat was created, and we worked on a digital government. We're in the middle of this process, and we've moved forward quite a bit, but we still have a long ways to go. Argentina is a federal country, and this makes that even if it provides guarantees, and it enables us to have flexibility according to each one of the provinces. Oftentimes, to implement something, it's a very hard road. So the different areas that we need to consider was to work taking into account public employment, making it more professional, working on a digital government where we had to reduce the paper in the government to make paperwork more flexible, and to provide people with an opportunity to be at the center and to have a power on their own paperwork. What happens is that people had something to do and they didn't know what the status of the paperwork was. And to know this, they had to go to the office, stand in line, to be attended after some considerable period of time. And if they were luckier, maybe an employee could clarify the question of how the paperwork was going. Today, they have the chance to monitor their stuff online, and I will share what kind of paperwork we now have in the works. Then we implemented open government, where there's a lot of government information which has public access, and they don't have to ask it from anywhere, but they can download it, whether at organizations or people. And digital country, what we did was implement different digital points that are locations where there's connectivity, and it's made available to people both to train citizens and to teach them how to use digital tools implemented by the government, and in many occasions to take children out of the street and provide them with tools and training oriented to their age. And then what we've listened all along today, how to make use of a digital government when the truth is we're lacking connectivity. And if in many Latin American countries we have a way to go in terms of connectivity, Argentina has a federal plan, and the truth is it's moving forward, but we still have a long ways to go. But you can't expect for everything to be done to move forward. So we're moving ahead online with everything. And in regards to the people that, as I mentioned before, we also trained in the digital point. In many occasions, what they needed was very basic, to know what applications the cell phone had available, what they could use to do some paperwork, or how they could monitor their kids through the cell phone. And this is done with digital inclusion. So what was the starting point? We began with a government that was totally paper-based, where 84% of the paperwork that existed didn't have any type of online paperwork. Everything had to be face-to-face. And we found a government that didn't have any tools for transparency, where the help desks were overflown, where they couldn't attend all of the people that went there or stood in line or over the phone. So people didn't have access with information on their paperwork. They couldn't have access to public information. There was no agency or body that could decide whether the information was public and they had a right to this access or not. Then the person remained halfway through with their question. And 70% of municipalities didn't have transparency policies and didn't even have a website. And where are we heading at, and what road have we taken? We want to finish this period with 100% remote procedures with web availability. And through the sites of each organization, we implemented a tab called Transparency. And so all of the information that is the obligation of the government to make available to have publicly. And on the other hand, we worked on digitalizing paperwork online. We're still moving along in this direction. And we began with the most popular procedures. We implemented digital tools in the provinces and tried to standardize them in such a way that regardless where the person lived, paperwork was similar and simpler. We worked on automating answers to improve response time from help desks, implementing chatbots. We implemented a single desk that's called Mi Argentina. And before this, each individual had to know what body was in charge of generating the body identifying the help desk or the phone you had to talk to. And then I was able to begin my paperwork. Having this single place, people can interact through this place and do their paperwork, and then the person in this single location, one-stop shop, could tell the person where to go or what to do. This has already been implemented, and we have a section that's called My Wallet, where people will have their different digital credentials and even digital documents, whether it is for production, all of the procedures for the transportation of goods. This file has an uncompared value because finishing all of this paperwork with different bodies takes up a lot of time, and losing it or being deteriorated is something very time consuming. People can now have them on their phones or a mobile device, and if they lost it, it wouldn't be any problem. And working from my area, not only with each one of these organizations, but also with those that have to supervise these documents, I really believe it's very valuable for people in the different organizations and therefore interact with public and private. Implementing government big data. It's a big challenge. Databases had lots of data, but many were not reliable. And I know I've gone overboard, but the truth is it's a big challenge. And that's why we wanted to implement these digital tools where some overlap each other and allows in a much easier fashion to detect inconsistencies between databases. And like I said, working in favor of transparency was a big challenge and the most important one. And the benefits that all of this generates, which is opportunity, transparency, low cost, simplification, interoperability, standardization. The truth is, I think it's very easy to see that the application of technology can help us in all of this. And from the Secretariat of the Modernization Department, there are different products or services to get rid of paper in the government. All of the files became digital. The procurement platform was done electronically. All of the government procurement is done through this platform. The remote paperwork, like I said before, and monitoring them, where citizens can tell what stage they're in, how long it took in a specific location, to track whatever happened with the process and what's the current status. And they can interact by adding documents in the case he or she sees there's an observation that don't agree with. The citizen can add information by contributing to this without having to do it face to face. I shared in the presentation, just so I don't go overboard even further, some specific cases in which we lowered cost and mostly improved time. Like I mentioned before, me Argentina, where we have a virtual wallet and where I have all of my credentials, where I can have access to my vaccination certificate, and where we can share health data in a customized fashion with security, applying biometric data to identify people, and in this way to share sensitive information. We're working very strongly with the Agency for Public Access Information that's advising us on personal data. And Argentina Home, which is the only location that puts all of the different 500 sites in Argentina, and it's a conversational web where we don't even have to look to a search engine. Say, for instance, I have to ask for public information or get A or B certificate, and it takes me step by step in each one of these processes. And like I mentioned before, the implementation of biometric recognition that we implemented for My Argentina. Finally, we implemented a chat for maternity and infancy. And what we did here was to contribute a decrease in child mortality into maternity centers. And the truth is that the support and the reminders that were sent to pregnant women with this app made it that they have a step-by-step guide during their pregnancy, and the result is this has been really wonderful. So I wanted to share this with you, and very briefly, I tried to summarize what we're working on in the government. Thank you all. Has positive and negative aspects to it. And before getting started, I remember I listened to an Argentinian singer that was singing Frédéric Chopin's Faust and took 1 minute in playing it. First, I'd like to say hello to the panelists, to the moderator, and to the general controllers of Costa Rica and the controllers of Bolivia in this meeting. New technologies have been very quickly incorporated to our societies, transforming the way we communicate, all aspects in human life. Governments are not exempt from this influence, and that's why it's impacted supervision. In spite of the short time we've done this, it's impacted us, and we're trying to renew, and in the case of the reviews that we make, to go beyond an accounting perspective to create a new paradigm based on the use of new technologies. We know that there are technological tools that facilitate and contribute to efficiency and efficacy of government audit and control. And I'd like to give you 4 examples. Blockchain, the use of the cloud, the Internet of Things, and finally, artificial intelligence that allow us to digest huge amounts of data to detect patterns of behavior. Within the international organizations, as our umbrella organization, which is the Intosai, which is the supervisory entity, will discuss new technologies in the public sector. Aware of the above, in Mexico, we've begun to use new technologies in the development of activities to maximize the impact of supervision and to process a larger amount of information. Although I know we're running short of time, but and we're doing this for a short period of time. In Mexico, it's estimated that federal institutions are processing 200,000 procurement contracts, 220 million invoices from suppliers for government bodies, 3 billion invoices coming from wholesalers, subcontracted suppliers, 400 million payments issued by the SHCP through the Treasury of the Federation. And in terms of resources, we're in charge of supervising public spending amounting to 5.6 billion Mexican pesos. Since 2015, we have new powers. We can review almost everything, including the own revenue transferred from subnational and municipal governments. We're a federal country. However, this is a practice tested, the Congress approved, and that we have to implement. To manage this amount of information and data analytics, this allows us to make better decisions in regards to the planning and the execution of audits, potentiating the results in the supervision of public resources, integrating different sources of information relevant to a repository called Big Data at the Federation, which allows for the analysis of a huge amount of data and execution of audits. Government entities in Mexico generate information that by legal provision is public and should be accessed on their web pages. The audit periodically collects this information from sources like the national budget, all of the government institutions at a federal level. We also collect their expenditure, public procurement contracts carried out by federal and local organizations, the Unified Registry of Suppliers, and finally, sanctioned or otherwise contractors that cannot participate in government contracts. Regarding big data, the audit department has integrated information considered as big data. In this regard, we've signed agreements with other institutions that generate information, such as the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Treasury, and the Task Harmonization System. In this way, sources of information considered as big data can be first and second invoice level, payments of Treasury, and news from the press. Our big data is made up by our unified repository that includes databases described above, in other words, common sources, and big data specifically is known as the architecture. Because the information generated by government bodies has different quality standards, the information and format before data analytics, we discuss sorting processes carried out with tools for the quality of data. Then there are different types of data crosses that, as a result, share relevant information. For instance, suppliers with non-existent transactions used by the SAT and contracts that exist with government bodies, suppliers that participate in public procurement when they've been previously disqualified because of something irregular by the general audit of the country or the Secretary of Public Function, which is the supervisory body of the executive power. Nuisance suppliers and organizations, suppliers that use shell companies, and finally, the payments by organizations with information of the payments made by the treasury of the organization. Apart from this, there's an analysis, for instance, trends in acquisitions, contracts that appear to be irregular, budget against procurement trends, transactions with sanctioned suppliers, etc. The audit also employs artificial intelligence tools that allows groups of databases that are not homogeneous to identify patterns that, for instance, may indicate an irregularity in public funds. I've already mentioned that we supervised the 32 subnational governments and the 2,400 municipalities or local governments. If a federation entity is identified as health or education, as well as shell companies built by each one of these companies, in this case, there's a network analysis to detect whether the companies are only related with one subnational government or a series of them. And we find that they have an influence at a national level. We also noticed a network of a shell company that builds 15 state-owned companies, and also 2 universities and municipalities in different federation entities. In the case of this university, with data from 2018, we found 18 direct links with shell companies, and it was possible to identify that each one of them is not only billing the government, but also different state dependencies, municipalities, local governments, other universities, and other state governments. With the use of these tools in supervision, we will contribute to the process of accountability, and we will promote citizen participation by providing people truthful information on the government work, and to issue recommendations for their improvement and therefore generate a positive impact in the economic life of the Mexicans. The use of new technologies and big data have shared the first results. I'm about to finish. First of all, an increase in reliability and appreciation and execution of the audit. By crossing data, it's easy to detect irregularities, such as contracts with sanctioned suppliers, payments of invoices with suspicious behaviors. The transparency mechanisms have been strengthened, as well as accountability. Also, we have other instruments that we promote and supervise. One is the harmonization of government accounting, and the second one, the standardization, because each entity or state have different legislations. We face the task of developing Mexican regulation to require any type of information from government bodies, but it's also necessary to formalize a requisite with each one because of the source of information. Also, in regards to other improvements, we're planning to include new sources of information in the big data repository as further level of suppliers, information of public servers in the government, the inclusion of information from social media, and the system for the registration of beneficiaries. Finally, the audit assesses artificial intelligence tools with the capacity to recognize patterns in natural language to extract relevant information on behavior, network of relationships, location, use of ghost companies, extraterritorial aspects, and information from the participants before issuing a contract. We're in a program to intensively train our auditors. We're evidently in an internal process to learn from these new technologies. There in this seminar, and it also flags certain things that we're lacking and the possibility that we have to look for colleagues from other Latin American entities or international organizations to ask for their support to this process. Finally, I went overboard. The moderator was getting restless, and it's a pleasure, and hopefully next year we can talk about the results in practice. Por ser un moderador no moderado, quisiera agregar, felicitar a los tres presentadores por ser tan disciplinados. Empezamos tarde, nos quedan 11 minutos. Quisiera terminar a las 5 de la tarde. Entonces lo que voy a hacer ahora es abrir a la audiencia para preguntas. Si tienen alguna pregunta dirigida específicamente a uno de ellos, por favor, dígaselas. Y cuando tenga una pregunta, denos su nombre, de qué país es y a qué organización representa. También puede hacer preguntas en español o inglés y tendremos traducción simultánea. Because when we are in front of these technologies, practically speaking, we come across a regulatory issue. So with the exception of Mexico, with its fintech law, I think Chile recently, with its crowdfunding law, and Colombia that handles it with the regulatory sandbox, what should be the regulation process all of the countries in Latin America should follow? This is my question. Argentina has a data protection law that is being amended these days, and that's why I highlighted and the public supervision entities in charge of supervising every time we include technology that involves personal data. In the case of My Argentina, data are conserved by the body that generates it and where data were collected. My Argentina is the institution that displays it to the person that owns the data. My Argentina is the platform to make data available to the owner of the data, and it doesn't it doesn't share the data with other organizations. If, for instance, there's a health data, it's not shared with other government organizations unless there's an agreement from the owner of the data. The truth is, this is a fairly sensitive issue, mostly now that we want to implement a health sector within the one-stop shop location. Does this answer your question? Estamos abiertos para más preguntas. Yo tengo una pregunta para Fabiana. Encuentro su declaración inicial que su organización se ha enfocado en organización de gobierno y luego se reenfocaron el ciudadano. Esto es un mensaje muy fuerte. Al hacer esto, ¿cuál ha sido la aplicación más popular con los ciudadanos, con la gente? ¿Qué es el servicio que más se utiliza a favor de los ciudadanos? The first tool that was made available to citizens was distant procedures, remote procedures, and this was an important implementation because people didn't have to move to different places to do the paperwork. For instance, there were lots of procedures that would only be done in the capital city, and they would have to travel around the country. They were face-to-face 100%. So this was one of the most widely used tools. And through the implementation of My Argentina as a single location to give one further tool to citizens to provide the follow-up to what I'm doing remotely and to have the snapshot of the procedure. I think these are the tools that empower citizens, and of course access to public information, which is done at a distance.
Thank you. Brian, I have a question for you. What are the implications of government digital transformation for public employees and for the citizens? What are the downsides, and how can they be managed?
Yeah, the issue here we're facing is the same one that we've faced for decades, that was you implement these new technologies that are more efficient, of course, especially for those auditors that are out there doing performance audits, we're removing jobs. So the question then becomes, how do we train these people for additional jobs so they can provide additional value in the economy? That's why this conference is so important, where it's looking at the public-private sectors together, because traditionally the way out of this is you've got a growing private sector, so it's a great place for the public employees to go to, but that takes the right kind of skilling activities, or they can be doing more advanced service and activities within the public sector. But what we're seeing in country after country after country, where they're going through and doing these digital transformations, that they're having hundreds of people that no longer have existing jobs. This is enormously socially destabilizing in the current economy, and that's where I go to countries and I hear stories of the 20-year-old child of the 40-year-old worker who lost their job is now making far more than their parents because they've had 2 years of computer programming. So there are some very specific ways to address that by, for example, adding visual programming languages. In the data analytics I talked about, we talked about data science, and we can bring those people in and not get rid of them, but instead keep them for their domain knowledge and help them solve more problems, rather than saying you don't know Python or you don't know R and you're out of a job. So we really need to think through what the plan is for doing this in many ways that involves maximum use of people in the public sector, a healthy, robust private sector, and then that we've got vitality going through the economy. There's some great role models for doing that. I'll point to the Baltics as one example. And in pockets of the US where we've had great success, in others not so much, because you've got cultural issues. So this boils down to those cultural issues and to really thinking ahead to what's happening in dramatic terms.
Thank you, Brian. And I have a question for Mr. Colmenares-Parabo. I'm going to be a little bit self-indulgent because I'm a procurement guy, and I was encouraged to hear in your presentation many mentions of public procurement. What do you think, from the point of view of the Supreme Audit Institution, what do you think has been the most impactful application of technology to combating corruption and collusion in public procurement in Mexico?
There's been good public practice, the consolidated purchases of drugs, for instance, the support done by the OECD and other line items. This has reduced corruption, but it's not enough because, but the risk is you can potentiate corruption. So we're auditing public procurement 2018. We're delayed, but we're having the possibility of real-time auditing. This new technology that we're developing throughout this year will allow us to do it now, to review any procurement process in real time. In Mexico, things are changing. There's a new government with a radical change in the government structure. Public institutions have to adapt to policies of each administration, and we're working to audit the procedures that are being followed in procurement, that all of them are being consolidated procurement, basically.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to me as a procurement specialist. We are at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to open the floor once more in case there are any follow-up questions. Arun, of course.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you for very useful presentations, and it's very interesting to see what Argentina is doing and what Mexico is doing. Prima facie, what I see is that both these countries are at advanced level, and we deal with many countries where the capacities are very, very weak. So from World Bank perspective or IADB perspective, when we deal with smaller clients and clients with weak capacities, what should be the starting point for us to start to sell these new technologies or sell these ideas? How do we make a beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's typically 3 ways to go about it. There's always 3 good ways to go about it. The first way is that we look at those things that represent the most pressing problems, that are visible to the public and that have the most political support behind them, because they're the things that are most likely to gain organizational momentum and be implemented with the least corruption. So those are very good projects to start with. The second way to start is by implementing the incubator or accelerator model. Sometimes these are government-sponsored, some central banks are sponsoring them, some are coming from universities, but you have people that are used to doing very, very short cycle time. I've got a number of friends in Argentina that are involved with those. And you put a team together, and what you thought would take 5 years takes 5 months. The time compression is just huge. That means you spend less money. That means you get public benefits out there faster. That means you build more support, and you get that momentum going for you. The third way to go about it is around those things that have some forcing factor associated with them, because that something else can't get done until this gets done. We talked this morning about infrastructure projects. That's a great example. We know that agriculture, or the food shortage, is not an agricultural problem, it's a political problem. We know that in minerals extraction, we've seen technology make enormous advances, say in the United States, becoming energy independent. We know that in manufacturing, and I'll show this in the video in the plenary tomorrow, we've seen factory output increase tremendously. And now we can look at infrastructure projects. So when you see infrastructure projects, and we're concerned this morning about how much money they take, wait. This has an answer too. It's being done all around the world. It can be done in Latin America as well, where you dramatically cut the cost of infrastructure projects. That's one of the reasons General Electric is in trouble, because the cost of its power equipment is falling like a rock. So that's the third category, where you have one little project that enables some much larger benefit to come together. So all those three things are very simple, practical starts, and some, as I'll discuss tomorrow, can start with university students that are 21 and 22 years old and create amazing things.
I fully agree. The truth is, we started with this same approach in some things, detecting what the problem is and the biggest needs for people. And once we proposed a solution and we implemented it by training people and disseminating the use of these technologies, and through digital inclusion, getting to people directly, and in our case, the most vulnerable people with less resources to have access to technology, which was what was more difficult. I have one further comment. What motivated us to begin working on this topic? It was the result of making an assessment of the supervision results in our country, where we observed that in the end we discovered several things. We recovered resources, but also a bottleneck was the judiciary, the General Attorney of the Republic, that what I find is that they had halted all of the complaints made by the audit throughout 10 years. And the idea, with the arrival of the new government, we're working in a coordinated fashion. There's a figure of a general supervisor and an anti-corruption attorney, and the clamor of people because of impunity, because this harms us more than corruption. The feeling of impunity that anyone can do something wrong and nothing happens, when we need to have an approach that whoever does something pays it sooner or later. And this motivated us from a new organizational structure to have the performance audit to analyze the behavior of public policy and to look for the massive processes that we have to take advantage of the tools of the new technology. Impunity was so strong that 30 million people voted for a change, voting fundamentally for the struggle against corruption, represented by the current President of the Republic.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions from the floor? If not, then I hope that you will join me in thanking our participants for their excellent contributions today. Brian Barnier from the United States, Fabiana Ayala from Argentina, and David Rogelio Corrales Paramo from Mexico. And thank you all indeed for your attention and for your questions. Arun, I think you have some administrative announcements to make before you let everyone go.
Sean, thanks. Some certificates for all of you and some presents.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope it's not a bribe.
No. You're welcome.